Hi students. As you already know, I had a health problem with my brother, so I'm recording our last class. It's the continuing of Phillipson and Crystal, the debate between the two, and in this class I'll insert a little bit of Zygmunt Bauman as well, so that we can understand the role of English in postmodern society. So, we were talking about the spread of English, and one of the important features of the spread of English is its role in academy and business. So, according to Bauman, uh, English, Bauman does not talk about the English language, but we can use Bauman's conceptions of postmodernity, or of what he calls the liquid modern world, to infer that English comes as a result of deterritorialization, English as a lingua franca, deterritorialization of capital and information with the advent of the network society, uh, and with the advent of global economy. So we have now a deterritorialized power, and English already had a history as a global language since the Industrial Revolution, so this favors a tendency for this status to be maintained. And what could change this reality? Well, many people uh, speculate about Chinese, for example. Will Chinese become a global language because China is now the country that grows faster than any other country in the world? Well, we cannot predict the future, but we can take Bauman's consideration to put some kind of a light in this discussion. Bauman says, em termos práticos, o poder se tornou verdadeiramente extraterritorial, não mais limitado, nem mesmo desacelerado pela resistência do espaço. O advento do telefone celular serve como golpe de misericórdia simbólico na dependência em relação ao espaço. O que importa nas relações de poder pós-panópticas é que as pessoas que operam as alavancas do poder, de que depende o destino dos parceiros menos voláteis na relação, podem fugir do alcance a qualquer momento para a pura inacessibilidade. So, what does Bauman mean by this? English is not necessarily anymore the language of the United States as a powerful nation. It's the language of a capital that moves uh, here and there and everywhere according to conveniences of the market. So, um, well, the idea is not of the language of a powerful nation becoming a global language, but being English established as a global language, or almost established at least, uh, I think it's not that probable that people would change the scenery. I think it's easier for the Chinese to start communicating with the rest of the world in English than starting again the process of promoting a lingua franca, of promoting a global language, so that their language and not English would become global. The setting is ready, and who are those who have power will probably adopt English, since we are not talking about nations anymore. We are not talking about China, England, the United States, or Germany. We are talking about corporations. And corporations already communicate all over the world using English. Um, so, who breaks down the walls in what Bauman calls the liquid modern world, or the postmodern world to some authors? Bauman says, a força militar e seu plano de guerra de atingir e correr prefigura, incorpora e pressageia o que de fato está em jogo no novo tipo de guerra na era da modernidade líquida. Não a conquista de novo território, mas a destruição das muralhas que impediam o fluxo dos novos e fluidos poderes globais. By new and fluid, global powers, we can understand capital, for example, or the information that flows through the internet, through the mobile phones, the smartphones, the tablets we use. So uh, now it's a tendency that languages are not that associated with nations, as I said in the slide before, but with the processes controlled by those who have economic power. Um, and thus, we are talking about corporations. Phillipson says that contemporary language policies are determined by the state of the market demand, and the force of argument, rational planning in the light of available facts. The discourse accompanying and legitimating the export of English to the rest of the world has been so persuasive that English has been equated with progress and prosperity. Well, at this point, we have since 1992, when Phillipson wrote this book, a process of westernization. So the West is a role model for the world. Modernization, especially in the technologies of information and communication. The spread of an international youth culture, popular music, cinema, um, uh, social networks, why not? Uh, Popular technology, consumerism, and they are all ideologically encumbered and have ideological as well as behavioral and econotechnical consequences to the spread of English. Um, so we do not speak English nowadays just because it's the language of the United States that comes to be the most powerful nation in economic and military terms, but because it came to be the language of technology, the language of the academy, the language of the social networks, the language of Hollywood movies, the language of pop music. Uh, if you learn English, if you buy English, as we have discussed, English has become uh, a market product. If you buy it, you are buying the prerequisite to buy other facilities, material or not, in postmodern world. So Crystal says that there is no nation now which does not have some level of accessibility using telephone, radio, television, and air transport through facilities such as fax, electronic mail, and the internet, much less widely in 2003 when Crystal wrote this book. Well, 10 years have passed, and nowadays social networks, for example, and smartphones are a reality. If you have been watching the news, recently the Brazilian government, released a policy to decrease the taxes over smartphones so that people could buy them, the famous C class, the middle classes, the lower middle classes. So, as you can see, English is becoming more and more and more a tendency. So, the English language implies having information, having access to technology, having mobility, having connectivity. So, it means having no borders. Uh, well, connectivity, according to Bauman, is a key word in postmodern society or in liquid society. Bauman says that in modern world, uh, we used to be we used to be evaluated by the quantity uh, of material resources we had, by the money or by the capital we had, or the products we could buy. Nowadays, one is evaluated by the possibilities that of the possibilities you have to connect people around you. So by the networks you can move around you. So this idea of having no borders is present, for example, in the slogan of a mobile cell phone operator in Brazil, Viver Sem Fronteiras. We all want to live with no borders. We all want, if we take TV commercials for language institutes, especially those who teach English, we all want to be citizens of the world. Uh, so we all want to be inserted in what Marco G calls a non-place. Uh, so could we speculate that English, instead of a language, is becoming a non-language? Well, maybe. What is a non-place? It's the place in which you are just transitorily. Marco G talks about, for example, the Wi-Fi networks in airports. You are at the airport with 10, 15, 20, 50 other people. You are face to face with them. You are all with the notebooks open, uh, checking your mail, posting in the social network, but you are not interacting with those people. You are interacting with other people through the electronic interface. So that's the idea of a non-place. That airport is a non-place. Uh, this seems to be analogous with what happens with English, because we speak English in Brazil not to talk to each other, maybe not even to talk exclusively to Americans, to Canadians, to Australians, to British, but to talk to the world, to have world communication. So English is at the same time the language of no one and the language of everyone. At the same time, English has no identity because it's the language of no one. It has all identities because it's the language of everyone. It's the media for communication. It's the medium of communication used by the majority of the population in the world when they need international communication. So this is the panorama that's set for English now. And if you speak English, you are then called a cidadão do mundo. You have leadership, ter liderança. You have success. I'm paraphrasing some TV commercials for language institutes in Brazil. Cidadão do mundo, I don't know if it is still the slogan for Yazigi, você cidadão do mundo. Wizard had as a slogan inglês com liderança, and CCAA, the Language Institute CCAA, around 2004, 2005, had as a slogan método para fazer sucesso, which was a reference to their methodology. So when you learn English, automatically you are successful. Now, what are the collateral effects of globalization? If there are collateral effects. And of consequent possible global monolingualism. For Crystal, some see the emergence of a global language, and in this case English, as a means for the development of an agreement and tolerance among all the people. Others, however, take this perspective as naive, a naive reference to a return to a pre-Babel situation. They are making a reference to the reference in the Bible about the Babel myth. Crystal does not stick to none of these extreme points of view. Crystal will divide these groups of these trends of thought in three big trends: linguistic power, linguistic complacency, and linguistic death. He defines linguistic power as he asks a question to start his definition. He asks, Will those who speak a global language as a mother tongue automatically be in a position of power compared with those who have to learn it as an official or foreign language? So, will Americans, British, Canadians be in a better position in the global setting than Brazilians, Italians, Colombians, Bolivians, Argentinians, and so on? And he then asks again, is it possible that people who write up their research in languages other than English will have their work ignored by the international community? He doesn't answer none of these questions. He leaves it for us to think about. And I'd like to know, I'd like you to take a reflection about this. What do you think about this? Uh, well, it is true that nowadays, if you speak English in Brazilian academic community, you have necessarily more prestige. Uh, Many works, although they are not written in English, uh, the academic experience requires us to write down our abstracts in English. At least for making some kind of spread of our scientific discoveries all over the world by means of the abstract. And then, if the abstract is interesting for someone who does not speak Portuguese, he or she will try to find an English version or to translate it to English or to learn Portuguese enough in order to read our production. Of course, if our production is in English, it is more widely accessible. So, Crystal says that there are enormous ifs with, with costly financial implications. And he mentions the cases of the success of English in Denmark, Sweden, and Netherlands that do not speak English as a first language, as their mother tongue. They do not speak English as a second language either. English is a foreign language there in Denmark, Sweden, and Netherlands. Now, what are the realities of investing in language policy there and here in Brazil? Well, their English is learned, not necessarily in language institutes like those we have here in Brazil, which are essentially private. They are, most of them have a public profile or have a public network for cooperation. Uh, English is taught in these European countries since the very first years in elementary and high school. This does not seem to be the reality in Brazil. So is Brazil in disadvantage in this process? Who are those Brazilians who are in disadvantage? Because those who can afford it will certainly uh, take English courses since a very early age. And this is what we see nowadays when we see parents putting their children to study English when they are 4, 5, 6 years old. Well, is this really necessary? But on the other hand, doesn't it give them some advantage? We can question, for example, how much can a child of a 4-year-old child learn of English? But it's certainly better to have access than not to have it. About linguistic complacency, uh, Crystal talks about a lack of motivation on part of the native English speaker to learn other languages. This is what he calls linguistic complacency, a kind of feeling comfortable because your language or their language, the Americans, the British, their language is spoken all over the world. So they don't need to learn a foreign language. Uh, this discouragement to learn a foreign language seems to be affected by the global status of English. And for Crystal, it has much more to do with an attitude than with linguistic performance. Um, there is nothing special about English speakers that they are not able to learn foreign languages. This seems to be a lack of linguistic policy to teach foreign languages in England, in the United States, in Australia. But it's very interesting to reflect about that all the materials, or the majority at least of the materials, most of the materials we use to teach English in Brazil come either from England or from the United States, or are written here with the supervision of American and British universities. So he says, Crystal says, that maybe it reflects an unsuccessful educational system in terms of foreign languages in countries that speak English as the first language. But as I said, how can they be unsuccessful in teaching foreign languages but be so successful in exporting their language to the rest of the world? Finally, the group that claims for linguistic death point out the risk that certain languages, especially those languages of minorities, may vanish as a consequence of the emergence of English as a global language. To Crystal, this process of linguistic loss and domination is independent of the establishment or not of a global language. It's just the case of two languages getting in touch with each other so that the most powerful will prevail. For him, English becoming a global language or not, some minority languages tend to be tend to disappear if nothing is done to preserve them. And then a question still remains. Wouldn't this language catalyze this process? Wouldn't English becoming a global language accelerate this? I do not have the answer, but I want you to think about. What may be the possible causes of linguistic death? Crystal mentions that the idea of territoriality, uh, Christian talks about territoriality to argue that a devastating effect of English could only be thinkable in places where this language is the dominant first language, the dominant mother tongue. Uh, Now I ask you, does this kind of consideration work in a context of globalization? Especially for a non-hegemonic nation that wants to get included? Well, if you want to get included, you have to, as we say in Brazil, dançar conforme a música. And what is dançar conforme a música in our linguistic context? It is to learn English and to speak it. So we have a matter of language, identity, and resistance. Who will buy, literally buy English as a global language, and who will resist to it? Crystal says that the need for mutual intelligibility, which is part of the argument in favor of a global language, is only one side of the story. The other side is the need for identity. And here comes a problem. Because when you get into another language, your identity that comes from the mother tongue may be, I'm not saying it is under risk, but it may be put under risk. Uh, he says that the other side is the need for identity, of showing where we belong and distinguishing one social group from another. But what has been done of identity in the global village? We read in Hall that national identities, altogether with national cultures, are imagined communities. They are a matter of representation. Well, if our representations change, if they are shifted from national identities to group identities such as hippies, punks, uh, it girls, um, gay, um black movement, and so on, maybe a national language does not play such a strong role, such an important role as it used to play before. Maybe it's a little bit more fragile now. So, is that a where we can belong to? Are not we in a situation in which this where is kind of liquid, to use Bauman's metaphor, in which we cannot touch this where we belong to, in which this where gains different shapes in different situations? How do we tend to socially interact in a postmodern society? We tend to interact based on identification more than identity. What Bauman calls cloakroom identities. Identities that are uh, you invest in one identity temporarily to fulfill a certain purpose. Then, in the speed of a click, you unclick that identity and you move to another, you switch to another one, and then this process is repeated many, many times during a single day. So, Crystal says that a more deep rooted process of globalization seems to be at work today, transcending individual languages situations. And then he attacks Phillipson, saying that anachronistic views of linguistic imperialism, which see as important only the power asymmetry between the former colonial nations and the nations of the Third World, are hopelessly inadequate as an explanation of linguistic reality. He says that first world countries with strong languages seem to be under as much pressure to adopt English, and that some of the hardest attack on English have come from countries which have no such colonial legacy. Okay, but these countries that were not colonies, they are in a different position. They are in a different situation if we consider their educational system. So, are not they still in a kind of advantage in relation to those countries that do not have a consistent linguistic policy to teach English? Is not it then a question of who can resist to what? Is not it different, Germany or France resisting to English because of historical matters, and Paraguay resisting to English? Isn't it a case of having the power to resist too? English has a new functional role, no longer associated with the political authority it once held, Crystal says. So, what he claims to see are new forms of power, and these new forms of power imply new forms of exerting this power. Uh, and a global language is a way to exert this power. A global language may imply cultural assimilation and standardization, and the question is, are these standards always desirable? Are we open enough to take the standards from another nation as ours, or at least to accept them? For Crystal, English has been getting a global aspect in a boat we can't, I'm sorry. Something wrong with the quotation. So he says English is a kind of boat. English becoming global is a kind of boat we can't miss. Uh, to put it in a Portuguese expression, seria um bonde que a gente não pode deixar passar. É um cavalo encilhado que tem que se montar. And he says that there may be no other, but are we ready to hide this horse, or take this boat? Do we know how to sail this boat? Is this boat desirable? These are the questions that I prefer not to answer in this course, but I think an English teacher, a conscious English teacher, who wants to teach a language not for colonization but for emancipation, must take into account before going to the classroom. So, with this, we finish our discussion on language, culture, and identity. I'd like to ask you to go to the system SIGA and check the final assignment proposals. Um, Choose one of the topics and develop it. And unfortunately, this is not the way I would like to finish the course. I'd like to finish it presentially with you. Uh, I hope we can have another presential meeting as soon as my brother gets better before the end of the semester, so that I can give you the grades and we can evaluate this course. I hope you enjoyed the semester. I hope you enjoyed the course. I know things haven't been easy for you, uh, but well, I hope this subject, language, culture, and identity, could give you an overview of the relationship between culture, different definitions of culture, how this culture is uh, built inside language, and how both contribute to form our identities, and how our identity is to be negotiated with other identities in a scenario of globalization. So thank you very much. Thanks for watching all the videos you have been watching, and I see you soon next semester on another subject. Goodbye.